Hey, buddy. Got everybody? Yeah. Good morning, everybody. My name is Keith Ellison, and I'm the Attorney General for the state of Minnesota. I'm honored to be here with the governor, with leaders in our state in health, education, our lieutenant governor, and of course our students, our young people. My job as Attorney General is to protect Minnesotans, especially the most vulnerable like our young people. It's my job to protect them from deceptive, fraudulent, and unlawful practices. It's my job to protect their health and their safety. And today, I'm announcing with all of us up here that we're using the power of the Minnesota Attorney General's office to bring a lawsuit against Juul Labs on behalf of the state and the people of Minnesota. We're suing Juul because they have deceived and misled Minnesota consumers of all ages, created a public nuisance, and especially harmed our young people. Juul is by far the dominant e-cigarette manufacturer in America, and it's growing fast. In just 4 years, it's grown from being an obscure startup to being worth over $38 billion. It controls 3/4 of the e-cigarette market in America today. That's up from 1/4 of the market just 2 years ago. This is a big, profitable business, and it's profiting off of young people. Our lawsuit describes how Juul has created a public nuisance and violated the whole set of consumer protection laws in Minnesota. They've done this in a variety of ways. First, Juul developed products with higher, more potent, and more addictive doses of nicotine than conventional cigarettes and other e-cigarettes. Then, not only failed to disclose that to its customers, but represented that its products were safe alternative to cigarettes. Second, Juul developed a sleek-looking product, sweet, popular flavors that were designed to appeal to youth, and then used vast, marketed, and highly effective youth-oriented marketing techniques to lock in their customer base of young people by addicting them to their product. Juul closely followed Big Tobacco marketing playbook of decades of marketing to young people. Indeed, Juul's co-founder has stated that even before Juul launched its products, they studied Big Tobacco marketing in order to move their e-cigarette product. Third, Juul was negligent in its duty to correctly verify its customers' ages as required by Minnesota law, and deliberately turned a blind eye to the fact that its controls were not working and underage Minnesotans were purchasing their products. Our lawsuit asks the court to find that Juul is responsible for creating a public nuisance and for violating several state consumer protection laws, including consumer fraud, deceptive trade practices, unlawful trade practices, and false advertising. We also asked the court to order Juul to permanently stop its deceptive conduct in Minnesota, including marketing to youth, fund corrective public education campaign in Minnesota about the dangers of youth vaping, fund clinical vaping cessation programs in Minnesota, including programs appropriate for youth, disclose all its research relating to vaping and health, and take affirmative steps to prevent the sale of its products to children. We also asked the court to award monetary relief for the great harm that Juul has already caused in Minnesota, as well as civil penalties and reimbursement to the state for costs related to controlling e-cigarette use among our youth. And order Juul to disgorge all profits from its unlawful conduct. Many people are involved in this fight for our kids, and we've been seeing them on the front line for quite a long time. Let me first thank Governor Walz and Lieutenant Governor Flanagan. They have been listening to young people throughout our state. You all have gotten on the road, and I thank you for that. And I wish you'd put your hands together for that. In fact, the young people, several of you all today met with Governor Walz and Lieutenant Governor Flanagan while they were out touring, right? So that shows, leading from the front, Governor. Commissioner Jan Malcolm and the Minnesota Department of Health have been studying youth vaping and warning Minnesotans about its dangers for years now. Thank you to everybody at the Minnesota Department of Health. And healthcare professionals like Dr. Ann Griffiths of Children's Minnesota have been on the front lines of diagnosing and treating some of the first cases of lung injury in youth related to vaping. Yeah. I'm joining them by using the powers of my office as Attorney General to hold Juul accountable in a court of law for deceiving and defrauding young people of the state of Minnesota and harming our youth in our state. And so let me say as I close, in Minnesota, we have a special duty to take on this fight. 20 years ago, the Minnesota Attorney General's office led the nation in taking on big tobacco. As a result of that historic settlement that Attorney General Skip Humphrey won, Minnesota saw dramatic reductions in tobacco use, especially among our youth. Now, Juul has stepped in to carry on big tobacco's tradition of deceiving consumers and profiting off of it. In fact, they've taken it to a whole new level. As a result, the rise in e-cigarette use among young people in a few short years has erased the past 10 years of gains we made in fighting youth tobacco. Let me just say that again, sorry. The rise in e-cigarette use among our youth in a few short years has erased the last 10 years of gains we made in fighting youth tobacco use. Juul is carrying on a tradition of big tobacco. And we at the Minnesota Attorney General's office today are carrying on another tradition. It's our duty, and building on the legacy of great attorney generals who came before me, to step up and build on that robust consumer protection duty that we have, that Skip Humphrey and many other attorney generals have carried on for decades. It's our duty to not let the gains that we made in protecting our youth from tobacco use over the last 20 years to be stolen by a company that is profiting off of deceiving them. And it's my duty to not stand by while Juul tries to addict a whole new generation of our kids. I'm not standing by, and neither is Will Gittler, 17-year-old young man who you're going to hear from right now.
Thank you. I'm Will Gittler. I'm a senior at Hopkins High School. I have some personal experience with this. I smoked my first cigarette when I was 13. I got it from a friend, and from there it was a downward spiral of tobacco use. I tried quitting many times, and eventually vapes became popular, and it was marketed as the safe alternative. And it seemed like that to me. That's what everyone was saying. So I bought into that, and I stopped smoking cigarettes entirely and went entirely to vaping. What they didn't tell me is that the nicotine content was marginally higher. What they didn't tell me is that the 5% advertised on Juul is 59 milligrams per milliliter, which is how most vape companies advertise their nicotine content. It feels like I've been deceived, like the progress that I thought I was making wasn't progress. And anyone who's quit any tobacco product knows how incredibly difficult it is. And this was just a big backward step for me. It's been discouraging, but I'm glad to be able to be up here and feel like I'm making a difference for other people. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Claire Herring, my classmate.
Hi, I'm Claire. I'm a junior at Hopkins High School, and like Will, I also have a personal experience with vaping. Around freshman year, I started vaping, and I had no clue what was inside of it. I had no clue what I was inhaling, pretty much. When I initially had hit my first vape, I was just told that, like, it was nothing, it was better than a cigarette, like, it's better than other drugs. Like, that's what I heard is, like, it's better than other drugs, it's better than other drugs. And I was just always told that it's an easy alternative and something easy to just give you a buzz and a chill. And that wasn't the case for me. I used for a total of probably 2 years on and off, and I was unable to quit. It was very hard for me. I mean, I did quit. I currently am, I don't use anymore, which is, yeah. But I would say, like, for me, when I was trying to quit, it was the hardest thing was I had to, like, tell my parents because there's no help for me. Like, if I wanted to quit, you just have to go cold turkey when you're a kid. Like, you can't use Nicorette gum, you can't use patches, like, because you can't buy them. You have to be 18. So it's just it was this whole battle for me for how to figure out how to get myself help without getting myself in trouble. And I feel like that's the whole thing that we need to focus on is that, like, this isn't something we should be punishing people for. This is something we need to be helping people about. And every single kid who's using, they have a reason they use. They use because they want to cope with something, and they use because they are stressed out and they have issues. It's not for no reason. And we also got to realize that, and we have to support youth right now in, like, how they are. And I feel that the companies like Juul and just big vaping industries, they marketed it to us, and they marketed it to people who don't have a fully developed brain and aren't fully able to make decisions. Like, if I'm not allowed to go buy my food from a grocery store, like, how are you allowing me to, like, go into a store and buy a vape? Like, I myself was able to walk into a store and buy myself my own vape. I do look a little bit older than maybe 16, but that doesn't mean I'm not questionable. Like, I'm definitely, like, if I walked in with my volleyball gear on after high school at the shop right next to my high school, it's a little weird that they didn't question. And just the fact that it was so easy for me to get it is what's concerning, and the fact that industries were allowing us to get it. They weren't doing any type of prevention to help us not obtain the items. No, they just let kids walk right in. So I think we need to leave today with focusing on mental health and focusing on supporting kids. And I'd like to give it off to Dr. Griffiths.
Well done. Well done. Beautiful. Dr. Griffiths, step up. Oh, there we go.
I'm going to pull this down. The high schoolers are taller than I am. I'm Ann Griffiths. I'm a pediatric pulmonologist at Children's Minnesota, and since this summer I've been treating children with severe lung disease associated with vaping. CDC refers to that as EVALI. And what's been striking to me is these are good, smart kids who really felt like they were doing something that was safe. When they are healing from their lung injury, I've had teenagers tell me that because they were in the ICU and weren't able to leave until they were healthy enough to leave the hospital, that was their only chance to get off nicotine. I have kids tell me in the office that they vape because they're addicted, that they may have tried it initially out of curiosity, but that the reason they continue to vape is because of addiction. And we don't have great ways to manage that addiction, and their addiction is really strong. These are really high doses, large volumes that they inhale. The science behind vaping makes it comfortable so that when you are vaping, you don't feel as much discomfort as you do from traditional tobacco. And that also is confusing then to children because they don't feel that sort of kickback of, that hurts. They're not feeling that discomfort, and so they vape more and more and more. It's easy to hide. It's easy to do it intermittently. It's like checking social media every couple seconds. You can vape every few seconds and put it right back in your pocket and be in your bedroom, be at school, be in an office. And they're not in a good situation to try to avoid that. I'm really worried about the long-term effects, both in terms of what those products might do, but also in terms of the addiction pathway that we've created, that highway that we've made really efficient so that if they are able to stop nicotine, what happens as an adult with other recreational drugs? And are they at more risk for other addiction as a result of their vaping as teens? They're smart kids. They're frightened. They know they're addicted. Some have threatened to harm themselves if their vapes get taken away. Their parents tell me that. The kids tell me that. Our community of doctors, I would say in a very short period of time, we've had to learn a lot of language about these products that the kids know all about, but also how are we going to treat this addiction problem when things aren't approved under age 18? We're bootstrapping our treatment and our therapies based on adult treatment. And it's very worrisome, the long-term concerns. So with that, I'm going to hand that over to Commissioner Malcolm.
Thank you, Dr. Griffiths. Thank you so much to the Attorney General, Governor Walz, Lieutenant Governor Flanagan. This is another huge day for public health in Minnesota. And Attorney General, I'm so glad you kind of put this in the historical context for us. And I am so grateful to the students, Will, Claire, for sharing your very personal stories. All these students up here are activists in their communities, trying to change this conversation and educate their peers about what is truly a public health crisis in our nation and in our state. It's so important that in public health, we use every tool we can to confront a public health crisis like we're facing now. And the public policy tools that the governor, lieutenant governor, and we are working on and will bring to the legislature are one important set of tools. But the enforcement of the laws is the other kind of critical thing, that for public health to be able to do what it needs to do to protect the health of all Minnesotans. And we haven't even begun to talk about the disparities in what is happening, the health consequences and the use of vaping products in communities across our state that vary by race and ethnicity and geography and income. So this is also a health equity issue that's very important to us. But we can't do everything that we can do without the right public policies and without the enforcement of those laws. This isn't all just about individual choice. We know that. It's about the environment. It's about the context in which kids learn about these products, what's normal, what's not, how easy it is to get access to the products, as Will and Claire have both shared. You've heard these really powerful stories. I'm going to be really brief. I just want to remind you of some of the data. We were here just a month or so ago, Commissioner Mary Catherine Ricker and I, joined by the governor and lieutenant governor, to talk about startling results from the last Minnesota Student Survey. The Attorney General's already mentioned the fact that in that data, we saw the complete erasure of a decade of gains in reducing youth use to historic low levels of youth use of conventional tobacco products, only to be completely replaced by this incredible upswing in youth vaping. Between 2016 and 2019, we saw rates of increase of 50, 75, 90% between the last student survey and the next student survey in terms of the number, percentage of kids at different grade points that are what we consider to be regular users of vaping, that they have vaped in the last 30 days. You've seen that data. It's on our MDH website. That convinced us that this was an epidemic that was quickly growing out of control. One factor working against us is that many students have not been aware of the health impacts, and you've already heard that from these guys. The data bear that out. 3/4 of 11th graders who are regular vapers self-report that they do not believe there is a significant health risk to what they're doing. They have bought into the presentation and the marketing of these products as harmless alternatives to cigarettes or harmless recreational products suitable for children. You've heard from Dr. Griffiths about some of the really concerning clinical aspects of the incredibly high concentration of nicotine, how quickly and deeply these kids are getting addicted, and how difficult it is for them to quit. And we know from the student survey that they want to quit. They become very aware very quickly that they are hooked. But as Dr. Griffiths has said, our cessation strategies have been geared toward adults, not kids. So appreciate what the Attorney General is doing here in terms of holding Juul accountable for its past practices and requiring some economic contributions from Juul to be able to address the issues that you've already heard about today. So I think with that, I'm sure that you're going to have lots of questions for the experts here, but it is my great honor to introduce our Lieutenant Governor, Peggy Flanagan, who has been a crusader for health for many years and is championing a laser-like focus on doing everything we can do to protect and enhance the lives of our children. Lieutenant Governor.
Well, good morning, everyone. As we stand here, I am really, really proud to be surrounded by our young people and wanted to say thank you for moving us to action, and specifically to Will and Claire. The visit and the conversation that we had at Hopkins moved us, and it moved us to action, and we are standing here because of you. So thank you. I'm concerned not only as a mother of a child, a 6-year-old with asthma, but as someone who has advocated for children for my entire career. We recognize the urgency of taking action to combat the increasing vaping rates in schools and among our students for the health and well-being of our children and the entire future of our state. That's why we're here today, to take action against a big company that has targeted our children in our state to make them lifelong customers. Communities across the state also understand the urgency to take action, and they have taken action by raising the legal age requirement for purchasing tobacco products to age 21, including the community where I live in St. Louis Park. But even with the increased age requirement, there have been increased concerns about vaping in our schools. The concern among parents, teachers, and students themselves is real. When we held listening sessions with our students across the state, they voiced their own concerns loud and clear because they are facing the health impacts and the serious consequences of these products. Like many other parents, I think about my own daughter and the children in our community who will be targeted by big tobacco, because the rise in e-cigarette use is big tobacco. With the rate of 8th graders using e-cigarettes doubling from 2016 to today, they need us to fight back because most 8th graders don't have lobbyists. In order to change the curve on this, it is critical that we educate ourselves, our kids, and the public about the risks associated with tobacco use. And most importantly, we must hold these companies accountable for targeting our young people, to keep them in business by ensuring that they are hooked on these products. It's not okay, and today we stand up and say no more. We are protecting our kids. That's why we're here today, to hold Juul accountable. As leaders in state government, it is our responsibility to take action. The state of Minnesota won't stand by and let big tobacco target our children any longer. Thank you. And with that, I'll hand it over to Governor Walz.
Good morning. First of all, Attorney General Ellison, thank you for manifesting in practice the oath of office that you took to protect the citizens of Minnesota, to protect the most vulnerable amongst us, and with a thoughtful, smart, and what will eventually be a historic move in curbing this epidemic. So thank you, Attorney General. And as stated, I am always proud to stand with Lieutenant Governor Flanagan, someone who has put children at the center of this administration, has put the children at the center of what Minnesotans believe in, and clearly understanding that this was a target at our children. It was a target for simple greed and simple profit. They knew exactly what they were doing. They studied to know exactly what they were doing. They knew the harm they were doing, and they continued to do it for that simple reason. And to have someone who, as you said, they'll do just fine with their lobbyists of making their case. We need a champion like Lieutenant Governor, so I'm grateful you're here. To our experts who are here, Commissioner Malcolm, Commissioner Ricker, thank you. We're working together across our agencies. The conversations that we had in Hopkins, in Faribault, in Moorhead, in Mankato, several things came out of that. First of all, we're going to be fine when these folks are in charge. This is a group of kids, and I want to give a shout out to all of the folks who are working on this. Tobacco Free Minnesota, Tobacco 21, the folks you see standing with us across the spectrum, nonprofits. There's an incredible program going on out at Minnetonka High School led by Marty Davis and Cambria. Private enterprise, private industry who took this upon themselves, and I love their slogan out there, they lied and we know it. That's who this generation is. That's where they're at. Our experts are seeing this and telling us what's happening. And I want to be very clear what we have in Minnesota. Attorney General Ellison made it clear. 20 years ago, an attorney general stood and told the world big tobacco surrendered. Well, they didn't just surrender. They regrouped. They went back. That was a historic landmark. We had them. We had this generation down to the numbers that were below 5% of using tobacco use until the scourge of vaping came upon us. They knew they were losing customers. They knew that if they don't addict you at young age, it's very difficult because their customers were dying from their product and it was going out. So they brought it back. But our health experts in Minnesota, as you heard with Commissioner Malcolm and her team, they've been working at this for an awful long time. And I just want to be very clear. The recent lung injuries that are being caused, it was Minnesota's Department of Health that identified vitamin E at the forefront of that. Minnesota's Department of Health and the work we're doing here is out in front of where the CDC is. The work that's being done at children is out in front of where they're at. And that's who we are. And I will tell you, as Lieutenant Governor and myself and our administration saw this, this has been coming on for the last several years, and we knew the urgency of this. And you saw it across the country. And governors were making moves to ban flavored tobacco and do different things. The state of Minnesota, and it's how we're set up, many of those avenues were closed to us for executive action. That's why we need to build the coalitions to look elsewhere, why we look at legislative action that will look at banning, that will look at raising the age, that will look at doing the things that we can do statutorily, but we can't wait for that. And so the filing of this lawsuit uses another tool. It also goes about, and being very clear about this, I want everybody in this room to understand what is coming. They are not going to admit they're wrong. And they are going to have attorneys, some of who will individually make more money than the entire office of the Attorney General's office of the state of Minnesota makes. That was what will be coming. And they will use their Merchant of Doubt playbook to tell us we're bad parents, to tell us we have bad kids, to tell us that we should have known, we told you, or how would we have known this was going to happen? I'll tell you how we know. We're going to get their research, and I'll damn sure guarantee you they had conversations talking about how do we get kids like Will addicted? How do we make sure Claire can't get off this? Because guess what? These kids aren't smoking cigarettes anymore. Trace back to who owns Juul. There's a new name for big tobacco, and it's Juul, and it's vaping. It's that simple. But my message to Juul as they're listening today is you can hire your attorneys. You will have your day in court, but we will bring the righteous justice of the state of Minnesota down on Juul. Because coming at our children and harming our children and our citizens, as the Attorney General said, as Lieutenant Governor said, and I would say all the state of Minnesota is, our first responsibility is the protection of our children. That's exactly what we intend to do. So I want to thank the Attorney General of the office. I want to thank all the partners. I want to send out a special thank you that this is just a representation of the hundreds of thousands of young people that Minnesota has that are leaders, they are thinkers, they are visionaries, and they are watching what we do. And today, they take another step. They step into the halls of power, and they make their voices heard for positive change. So thank you for that, and we're open for questions. Any questions?
Actually, Attorney General Ellison, what I'm not hearing a lot about is the 2,700 injuries that have been recorded, the 47 deaths, you mentioned the vitamin E, but I gather from your approach that you're undercutting an argument that this product is being misused. Am I right about that? Is that part of your approach?
Well, let me say that our lawsuit focuses on the deceptive and unlawful trade practices that they've used. There's a separate argument and a separate set of accountabilities that will be brought to the people responsible for the lung injuries. Today, we're focusing on a part of this problem, which is the deception and the targeting of our kids. So, no, we're not foregoing anybody's accountability and responsibility. We're focusing on a key aspect of this problem, and so that's what we're doing here today.
You're focusing on the legitimate use of the product, in effect.
Yeah. If you use this product as they intended it, it's not a good thing. It'll addict you, it'll harm you, and they focused on kids, and they were deceptive in doing it. Now, the lung injury thing is a separate issue. It's not escaped our attention, and we may well be in touch on that soon, too.
Attorney General for vaping, for nicotine levels in e-cigs as opposed to cigarettes.
I didn't catch that.
Are there different nicotine levels federally, limits on how much nicotine you can put in a vape device as opposed to a cigarette?
Great question.
Well, that's one of the real conundrums here, is there's a presumption that there's regulation at the federal level of these products, and there is not. So what the question is, how are they being presented? How are they being marketed? They're being represented as being a safer alternative when, in fact, the concentration of nicotine, as you've heard, is significantly higher. And that's not regulated. Correct. There's no ability to, at least at the present time. Now, there's discussion at the federal level of becoming more aggressive on federal regulation. We certainly hope that's the case. We urge that to happen, but it's unclear whether and how fast federal action is going to happen.
Regulated for cigarettes?
The content of nicotine, you know, I'm going to have to get back to you on that. I'm a little rusty on the federal nicotine laws.
Mr. Attorney General, can we go back to you on the lawsuit? Can you contextualize what you're seeking in terms of dollar amount, damages, and contextualize that with the historic tobacco lawsuit?
Yeah, we are seeking a number of things which are contained in the complaint. I'll just list them off for you right now. We're seeking, one, that they permanently stop the marketing of these products to young people. Let me get my list. Stop its deceptive conduct in Minnesota, including marketing to youth. Fund a corrective public education campaign in Minnesota about the dangers of youth vaping. Fund clinical vaping cessation programs in Minnesota, including programs appropriate for youth. Disclose all of its research, this goes back to what the governor said, relating to the vaping and health, and take affirmative steps to prevent the sale of its products to children. So that's what's in our complaint. In terms of dollar amounts, look, we're assessing the extent of the damage. It is extensive, but that's part of our discovery process. We don't have a magic dollar figure at the beginning of the lawsuit, because we need to get in there and follow the course of the lawsuit, which will show us what the true damages really are. But we do.
Could I interject? Could it approach the tobacco lawsuit? Do you think you're talking that same realm?
I would not refute that.
Mr. Attorney General, there's other states like New York and California that filed similar suits. Is there any talk about combining your lawsuits, and would there be any benefit to doing that?
Let me tell you, we talk all the time. We work on these things. We collaborate and share information, so we're already doing that. Thank you.
Mr. Attorney General, let me ask you, what was it about Minnesota's consumer laws and the public nuisance law that makes you feel this is the best avenue? I'm sure you look at many avenues for possibly pursuing legal action.
Yeah, well, they misrepresented what the addictiveness of their product. They argued that it was safe. They used attractive marketing tools and things like that. I mean, if you look at the complaint, you can see it's all laid out very clearly. And their marketing techniques, the deception in Minnesota law just doesn't allow companies to say one thing and do another. And so we're holding them accountable for that.
Why didn't you just join in with other state lawsuits that have been filed recently?
Every single lawsuit that I file has Minnesotans at the heart of it. So my job is to defend and protect the interests of the people of this state. And even in the opioid cases, we filed in Minnesota. We filed all the time, even when we do have multi-state action. So it's not unusual at all.
Does the cessation products work with the children if they can't afford clinical therapy to recover from the addiction? Is there any other alternatives to children that can't afford?
That's a great question, and I think the short answer is we don't know. There's such an uphill battle to determining what kids need because we don't have the data. We don't have, this is a when you think about doubling rates of e-cig use in such a short period of time, the sheer quantity of nicotine consumed is one part of it. I think the piece of the sort of social phenomenons around it are another. And I think when we look at other components within vaping devices and their effects on the immune system, that's a whole other piece. And so to figure out which medications are going to be the best needs research, right? And so we're extrapolating from adult data and doing our best with that. And what we're finding is the addiction is so severe that it often needs a multi-prong approach. It's not just seeing a therapist, and these kids know it's bad. So it's not, I get the message a lot from people like, well, don't they know? Or if they met with a therapist to understand how serious this is, they know that. And so I think it's going to be a multi-prong approach. Some of our patients have used, with the help of psychiatrists, have used several off-label indications of other medications to try to get to the core issue of addiction, separate from dealing with nicotine replacement therapy. We've had patients who've gone inpatient. We've had patients who've done outpatient rehab. So I think it's going to be kind of a multi-pronged problem.
Mr. Attorney. I'm sorry, I just want to bring us back to something very important that Claire said in her comments about the underlying drivers of this epidemic and the stress and the mental health concerns that kids are expressing loud and clear. Commissioner Ricker and I have been and will continue to work on what is that school health connection. It doesn't help that we're not supporting all the resources that schools need when it comes to health and counseling. So not only the clinical cessation services, which are so critical for this depth of addiction, but taking that broader look at what resources need to be in the schools to support not only the immediate crisis, but the upstream causes as well. Thank you.
I'd like to ask Claire and Will, what is your reaction to being here at this news conference and the journey from when you obviously must have agreed to be part of that roundtable back at Hopkins High School?
Well, for me, I was very shocked. I didn't know what to think. And I think that what I've just been thinking about through this whole thing is that I'm strong, and I know that for me personally, I deal with so many mental health issues, so many diagnoses. I have an eating disorder, depression, anxiety, tons of things that I could just list off. Issues I deal with every day. And it just proved to me that I beat one of the hardest addictions in the ass. And I mean, last night was the first night I officially threw everything away. I was out the drain. I put it in the garbage. I don't have any of it in my room anymore. And I just feel it made me think that I'm strong. I mean, it just gave me confidence. So, yeah, that's personally.
This has been an interesting experience for me. I have some experience speaking for 12 Steps programs, and a lot of the things I talk about there have transferred to here, talking about the roots in mental health, talking about people knowing the damaging effects and still doing it, talking about what we can do to help. And I think a lot of that stuff transfers. And it's an amazing opportunity to be here with some amazing people talking about things that matter to people in our generation. And I'm just incredibly honored to be here. So, yeah, thank you.
General, following up on something that Claire said, she was able, as an underage person, to just go right in and buy these products. I suspect that the folks that you are suing are probably going to say that Minnesota has an enforcement problem in that area. How big is it?
No, they have a deception problem. That's the problem. Of course, as the governor very ably said, they're going to try to point blame in every single direction they can think of, but the responsibility is on their shoulders, and we're going to prove it.
At the same time, Attorney General, the opioid lawsuits have taken a long time, and they're still not done. How do you caution people that this is not going to be quick, even if Minnesota wins the case?
No, I would say that's right. Don't expect overnight. Sometimes justice takes persistence and commitment. But we saw attorneys general over the course of time get into the tobacco lawsuit, see it all the way through, and they got justice. And we did reduce youth smoking. And no thanks to Juul, those numbers have increased again. So we're back in the fight.
I want to just be really clear, though, well, this, we are in it for the long haul to hold Juul accountable. There are also things that we can do at the legislature this year, like banning flavors, for example. So we're not going to wait to take action on this. I think you can expect that we'll be working with our partners in the legislature, with the Department of Health and with the MDE to figure out exactly what we can do in the upcoming legislative session to take action now and hold these folks accountable and protect our children.
2 more questions, folks.
Dr. Griffith, could you talk to us a little bit about, aside from the actual addiction, what is the harm from exposing still developing children to such high levels of nicotine?
Well, I think the exposure to the nicotine piece, we look at what that does to the brain, and there are different hormones that control happiness or the general sense of happiness, right? And there are pleasure hormones, but there are also contentment hormones. And so the kids are trying to self-medicate by hitting those pleasure-happy hormones. And then that, over time, can really suppress your contentment hormones. I joke with the kids in the hospital, you need humor when, you've been intubated, you had a breathing tube down, and you've discussed with your parents where your life has taken this turn. So I'll say something like, I bought a pair of shoes this weekend and I felt happy, but I didn't come home feeling content. Right? So right. So the concern is that if you are continuing to push your pleasure hormones up, how are you fighting against your contentment hormones? And is that leading to more anxiety and depression? And that's our worry. Right? We don't, for vaping specific, I think it's really too early to say, because they're not inhaling one chemical. They're inhaling multiple chemicals, and those chemicals interact with each other. So I can't say yet with our research, how does that whole constellation of chemicals together inform that? But that's my worry. I think that we sort of cut ourselves off at the ankles in trying to self-medicate with vaping products, and that we end up having more mental health concerns as a result. But then you deal with withdrawal symptoms, and withdrawal symptoms look a lot like mental health symptoms. So then they'll say, no, it's the only thing that helps my anxiety or my depression. But the symptoms you get during withdrawal look a lot like anxiety and depression. So it's a really vicious cycle. And the flavorings, the lungs can't digest well. So you think of the immune system as your garbage men taking up the trash on a daily basis, and something that may be safe in the stomach, something that's food grade quality in the stomach, doesn't mean the lungs can digest that or process that. That also affects their nicotine levels. And so it's not just necessarily the milligrams, it's what else is going in with it that acts like a preservative and keeps that drug around for longer potentially. All of that data is still forming. We look at the work out of Chapel Hill, looking at flavorings, and research is stringent and research is slow on purpose. We want research to be slow on purpose because we want to make sure our research is ethical. We want to make sure patients have informed consent, right? And so we go through a pretty rigorous process with institutional review boards and hospitals. That's not the same with companies necessarily. They can be nimble. They can change their flavoring so that when you get approval to study a flavor and the new flavor's out, And so it's that constant sort of chameleon phenomenon. But when you look at the research coming out of Alana Jasper's lab at Chapel Hill in North Carolina, you see that the immune cells can't break down those flavors, and it's causing immune dysregulation. And so I do think that's a long-term health concern.
One more question, folks. The governor's got to answer questions from Greater Minnesota reporters in the other room after.
A question for Will and Claire. Do you have advice for peers who might be trying to quit?
And can you talk about what it was like for you guys during the
Okay. The first piece of advice that I think is really, really important is talk to people. People will be supportive. A lot of people have struggled with this, and doing it alone is so much harder. And if you reach out to your parents, you might think that it'll be problematic for them, but I know mine helped me do a little bit of nicotine replacement therapy, which with my other therapies and things really helped me a lot. So I think talk to people and go for that multi-pronged approach. I think it's really important.
Yeah, and I'd also say just not as much advice, but just something to keep in mind, like you're not alone and you're not the only one. And as you can see, like this just proves there's other kids, there's so many kids who've been affected by this. And whether or not you're directly affected, you can still be affected by this because your friend's using and you're upset with that or something along those lines. And I feel like what I would just like give advice is just like, it's gonna suck. Like it's gonna suck so bad and you're gonna want to just use so much and you're gonna wanna just keep like going, but it's worth it to be able to say that you can go like a day without nicotine and you can go a day without inhaling something into your body. So, yeah.
Well, folks, the governor and the attorney general have to hop on a press call with other reporters in Greater Minnesota that are watching but unable to answer questions. I suspect that all the young people in the room here are willing to talk if you would like more Q&A time with everyone that's up here. So thank you everyone for coming.